Welcome to the Daily Horror Habit Podcast. I'm your host, Jay Krieger, bringing you daily reviews of currently streaming horror movies for your twisted pleasure. Be aware that these reviews may include mild spoilers. And as always, I hope you enjoy. Today I'm joined by a friend of the show and resident zombie fanatic Bernie to review the British horror comedy miniseries Dead Set, created by Charlie Brooker, who many people know from Black Mirror. Following a group of reality TV stars on the show Big Brother, a zombie outbreak unfolds, unbeknownst to them, though the reality of the outside world soon comes crashing through their doors. Dead Set is a mere 5-part series and is currently streaming on Netflix. Bernie, welcome to the show.
It's very good to be back, my man. How are you doing?
Not too bad, not too bad. I knew we were going to have to come back to zombie shows or movies one of these episodes, so I'm glad that you picked this one.
Yeah, I feel like it's one of those hidden treasures that not too many people know about. I actually only found out today from you that this is apparently on Netflix. I was watching it on YouTube bootleg style.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think this is one of those movies that once you kind of watch it, it definitely shoots up your list on the top zombie movies that were ever kind of put out, or zombie shows, I would rather say.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're kind of like the zombie guy. Like, whenever I need recommendations on zombie movies or series, I always come to you. So what about Dead Set kind of stands out to you amongst the hordes of zombie movies and shows we get, like, seemingly on a weekly basis?
Yeah, well, first, I appreciate you having such a low bar for me.
No problem.
But no, with Dead Set, I think that this is one of those shows, that it delves into a very interesting concept of zombies, but the outcome is super realistic. I don't want to jump too far ahead here, but I just felt like, obviously there are certain things that are done for kind of cinema's sake, right, to move the story along, but I think especially the way that that Charlie Brooker, the director here, the way that he was able to kind of create these characters in a very short amount of time where we don't know too much of their backstory, but within 40-50 minutes you have a good feeling for kind of who's the asshole and who's kind of a good guy should be cheering on. That it's just a really good kind of crescendo and all around kind of wrap up for this entire movie, for this entire show.
Yeah, I was really surprised considering it's only 5 episodes. The premiere or the pilot episode is 45 minutes. And then each episode after that is like 20, 22 minutes, something like that. And once I finished it and I started thinking about how long it actually was, I was pretty surprised how well fleshed out those characters were. Not to necessarily say that they had a lot to them in terms of like being these rich, complex characters, but I think they were more fleshed out than I anticipated them to be. And to the degree that none of the characters really overlapped one another, everybody had a distinct personality. And like you said, they're each defined enough that they contribute something differently in a way that I think as a collective, it really does capture that kind of the reality show vibe that they're trying to go for. It's not just one note arguments over and over and over. It kind of sees certain characters adapt to the situation in ways they normally wouldn't have to have, and yet there's still a little bit of their personality in there, no matter how much they've changed for better or worse. Exactly.
I mean, again, the evolution that you get here, I don't want to compare the show overall to The Walking Dead, but I could make an argument that Kelly, the main character in here, she has more character arc and development in 4 or 5 episodes than Laurie did in The Walking Dead for whatever that was, 3.5, 4 seasons. So again, that's a testament to the writing and obviously the acting, because I think the actors did a really good job of portraying their characters. But even just starting it off, the whole kind of preset to the zombies really attacking, I think the way that those characters played it, again, it's very realistic. I'm not much of a reality TV show fan, but that's exactly how I would picture a producer acting, kind of a pompous, arrogant asshole who's, ordering people around. He's just, kind of, for lack of a better term, kind of just swinging his dick around and, just kind of showing that he's kind of the alpha in the room.
Yeah.
And then opposite him, you have Kelly, who he kind of treats like garbage at the beginning, and she becomes kind of the main, character for the good guys in that sense, and that's keeping everything afloat, showing her own kind of alpha in that nature, or in that sense, excuse me. So again, just the the way that the show moves along and each episode, I think, builds really well off one another. There's just always kind of a sense of both hopelessness and like a little a little kind of creep of light that comes in at the end where you're like, maybe they can get through this somehow. And obviously it doesn't work out that way.
Yeah. I think that's what really grabbed me first, because we get so many zombie movies and shows, like I said, seemingly on a weekly basis, that it's less about the zombies themselves when I'm trying to decide on a series to watch. It's more about the angle that they're going to take with the characters, because ultimately is what is going to largely separate the movie from the last zombie thing you watched. And Dead Set definitely grabbed me in the way like you were talking about, in that it's got this very non-traditional setting where it's a reality TV show, and we're jumping between the house basically, which is a replication of Big Brother, which I guess is a reality TV show for like in the UK, and there's an American version. But they did that they like recreated the set and everything, and they got a cast that's supposed to be mimicking that in reality, and kind of jumping between that and the control room where we see Patrick, who, like you said, is the dick swinging boss, and just seeing how they manage the reality TV aspect inside and outside of the house. And then seeing how once the zombie outbreak happens, like the people inside the house don't know. It takes them, they don't realize till the next morning when Kelly eventually shows up. And then obviously the outside world essentially comes like crashing through their walls, which again, I think that is the interesting aspect. And I almost wish that they had stuck with that a little longer. I think it would have been interesting to see what would happen if the reality TV people that are in the house don't realize for like 2 days or something like that. I think that if they had stuck with that a little bit longer, I wish they had done that. But overall, I'd like the new concept to approach a subgenre of horror that can be pretty stagnant sometimes.
Right. Again, I think they added a really like interesting kind of a unique flavor to the zombie genre. One of the things I will say I disagree with you just on this point is I think when they realized, like, I think it was the milk hadn't been replaced or something like that, I do feel like those characters, real live actors like that, I would think that they're, that kind of needy that they would start to kind of freak out a little bit. I think the way that kind of initial onset of zombies happened, I don't know how they would have been able to not realize like more than a day after, even if they just like walked out onto the terrace with that pool area, you know what I mean? I feel like they might have just heard some, moans and shit like that from the zombies. But no, I see your point in the sense of, again, this could have been a 10 episode, series if they wanted to drag it out. But I think it had like a unique point where, again, like you were wanting more in some instances, right? But I think in overall, like the arc of the story, I think was really well put together. Was there ever a point in that initial outbreak where you just thought that this might move out of that kind of house and into a new, place with like Reza Mod, for instance, or were you always kind of thinking that it would stay within those walls, so to speak?
I kind of assumed it was going to stay within the walls just because that is the most unique aspect. Like I kept hoping, especially when Kelly leaves for the pharmacy store run, and we kind of get a look at what society's fallen apart. They've been overrun by zombies and whatnot. And the police even show up at one point and they kill a couple zombies, and then they have to kill one of the cops who gets bit. I was glad that they returned because, again, that's the more unique angle to take. And if it's just them kind of like running through the countryside, it's something that we've seen in every single zombie movie, essentially. And while we disagree kind of a little bit on how far they could have taken them being in the house themselves, I think still what we got, and like you said, in the 5 episode series, it's pretty condensed, but in terms of the narrative being fairly well paced for those 5 episodes, I think they made the right decision.
No, absolutely. And, kind of going back to that, what would you say was kind of the craziest death for you watching it and that initial run? Was it like Davina getting her throat basically ripped out, or the guy in the
was rough.
ripped apart? Was it kind of one of those or something else?
I will say, I think this show had really great effects, like practical effects for the zombie kills and everything. Those were really fantastic. I think my favorite death, though, is probably Patrick, who is the dick swinging guy that's in charge of the reality show at the end, because he's such a prick the entire series. Like, he's such an asshole to every single character. He never lets up. We see a lot of these characters at one point or another. They're all very stressed and whatnot, but they all fall back and they realize, like, hey, we have to do what's best for the group at the end of the day. And we're more likely to survive if we're working together rather than against one another. And then Patrick is like, fuck that. I'm going to work against all of you.
Right.
And so when he gets ripped in half by the zombies at the very end of the series, like, that was awesome.
Satisfying for sure.
Super satisfying, because not only is he a dickhead who had it coming, but also the effects were fantastic. Like, they rip him in half, they're eating his guts, and then one of them rips his head off, and you see the spinal column kind of just like trail down the hallway. Like, it's super brutal but satisfying at the same time.
I was gonna say, I've never felt more kind of in a weird position, because at one angle, right, it is kind of horrifying to see someone get ripped apart like that in a zombie movie, but for it to be that character, I think that might have been one of the more kind of grotesque deaths that there have been in a zombie movie. I mean, probably the most startling one for me ever was that girl in Night of the Living Dead, excuse me. Remember when the car blows up with that couple and there's zombies that like walk over and just like eat the remains while those people are just
yeah.
That was kind of the craziest one to me, just because, again, it's like, the original zombie movie, obviously, but it's so startling to see that and that's probably realistic to how zombies would act, right?
Right.
But I loved how Riz Ahmed, I forget what his name was in this.
Rick.
Yeah. I loved his acting, but his character kind of pissed me off to one extent, just because he had a perfectly safe location. And that girl, Kelly, I mean, he didn't really know this, but, when they kind of initially had that mini breakup, like when he's at the train station, she's hooking up with a guy, then she gets really close to space, and like, I don't know, this poor guy like ran 40 miles basically from where he was, and he ends up getting shot like 16 minutes after he gets in touch with Kelly again. So like, just that whole character arc, again, it's nice in like the feel good way, like they got together, but he would have been so much better off with Alex at that little like farmhouse that they were in, right? They had fencing around that looked like they had a water well there. I mean, I don't know. What are your kind of thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, Kelly not only she cheats on him with somebody that works there, but then once the outbreak starts, like, it looks like she's gonna hook up with Space, one of the other housemates, and it's just like, you just keep jumping from different people, and it was just like, yeah, it kind of speaks to, I think it speaks to Charlie Booker's writing and directing style, in that, actually, I'm not sure if he directed this. I know he was the creator and he wrote it. I don't know about directing. I would assume he directed the pilot and then they had somebody else do the other four. But my point is that I can see his tone coming through in Dead Set, or which would evolve into Black Mirror eventually, because a lot of the Black Mirror episodes are kind of Twilight Zone-esque in that they end very darkly. Like, they really don't have a lot of regard for the characters at the end of the day, in terms of, you're not going to get a happy ending every time. And this show is indicative of that, I think, because not only the ending, which we'll get into, but also just all of these little story arcs that for characters that wrap up don't end well for anybody. And like you said, we see Rick, who travels halfway across the country or whatever to find his girlfriend just because he saw her on a TV. And yet at the end of the day, he gets killed for his trouble.
Right. And I might be jumping a little too far into this, but how realistic would it be that the one channel that still exists is just showing like a live feed of that place? That
yeah, I mean, that's very serviceable for the plot, and it's kind of apparent.
Yeah, I hope he went to get some lottery tickets before he went over to that place. But kind of going through that, then obviously they have that. There's that core group of folks. There's Pippa and Patrick that come by, a little bit later on, and then also Rick. who was your favorite character in this series? Was it Kelly? Was it, kind of one of the castmates in that sense? Who do you think it was?
I think it was Kelly. Kelly was my favorite, and she's played by an actress named Jamie Winstone. I definitely liked her character the most just because she's seeing that arc, which it's not the most original arc in terms of just like she goes from being terrified, like everybody would be, very nervous about killing anything, and then we see that she comes to terms with the fact that like she's gonna have to do things that she would never do in her normal life if she wants to survive this. So like we see the turning point being one of the cops thinks that like two cops show up when they're trying to raid the pharmacy. One of the cops gets bitten, so the other cop kills him. And then the cop that's still alive thinks that one of the group got bit when really he just cut himself on something. And so he's about to kill one of the housemates. And so Kelly basically kneecaps him, and then he gets eaten by the zombies. And it's kind of at that point we realize she's willing to do anything to survive, basically. And anything that will ensure not only her survival, but also the housemates who she works for the station and she's been involved in the making of that reality show, but doesn't know them. She like runs and gets coffee. So she doesn't really have an investment in these characters other than wanting to make sure, other than being a good person, essentially.
Right. So Kelly's arc was kind of the most interesting one, I think, just because she starts out, like you said, basically getting coffee for someone and hooking up with, like another random PA or whatever those guys are called on the set, right? And then sees her friend get killed by that guy later when he's zombified. If you remember kind of, and I didn't notice this until I rewatched it the second time now, but when you watch it the first time, I don't think a lot of people pick up just how, I don't want to be rude. I'd probably be doing the same thing, but just how kind of ridiculous she was, as just in the sense of like, you're in a zombie situation, you're yelling, trying to like
very frantic and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, if you remember at the end when they're running and like all the zombies get loose by that, jackass pedophile looking guy.
Yeah. Golem.
Yeah, exactly.
We should clarify that Golem is one of the housemates. His name's Joplin, but he's like the 40-year-old in the group that nobody likes. And so eventually that comes into the narrative, but sorry to interrupt.
Right. Not a random Lord of the Rings crossover here. But yeah, so you have him open that door, and obviously there's a sea of zombies come through, and yeah, she did just watch her boyfriend get shot, but she might be in shock potentially, but she's just sprinting away at that point. Like, she's not screaming loudly, and I think she was a little bit more composed than the other guys just because like she had lost so much, and again, she had seen so much at this point. Like, she's been through the beginning of this kind of chaos through, kind of helping other folks out, and now at the end of this, obviously she's kind of relatively leading the group. But yeah, at the beginning, I kind of didn't like her just because, again, she's, she breaks up with Rick. She goes on her own kind of romance in that sense. And just her character doesn't seem strong, if I guess that makes sense. Right. But again, as it grows and grows, first from, yelling at one of those castmates, I forget the gentleman's name, but, he's playing around with opening the door where there's a zombie in that little kind of.
Oh, Marky.
Yeah. Again, great actor who plays him, because he plays him spot on. He reminds me of like a Jersey Shore character. But, again, her, basically putting a knife on him, saying, or I forget if it was a knife or a gun, but, basically threatening him, saying like, we're all going to die if you do that. And eventually it ended up getting a couple people killed. Again, it just showed the progression of that character. And it was really interesting to see.
Yeah. I think since you said that, I think that is important to Kelly's arc, in that when we first meet her, we don't know why they broke up, but the fact that I don't even think they officially say they broke up. They're having some kind of issues. And then we find out that she basically was like hooking up with other guys. It kind of makes you not like her. And then when she reacts in a way that I think a lot of people are kind of tired of seeing in a lot of horror movies, where it's like, she spends the first episode like screaming and running around and crying and all this stuff. But then we see that she grows. Like we have to have that base. And I think it's what makes her arc. It's not necessarily a redemptive arc, like per se in the traditional sense, but I think it does show she leaves behind some of the past behaviors that she had in the beginning in terms of just like putting herself out there and helping the group and doing what's best for the group in a way that, like you said, makes her the most interesting character and have the most effective character arc. Whereas a lot of the characters we meet, they're each defined by their kind of unique traits and whatnot and personality and everything. But then they don't really change that much. You know what I mean? Some of them do, but for the most part, like what you see is what you get. Whereas with Kelly, it's like a 180 degree turn with her, like completely different.
I think there was like a moment where I'm always rooting for humans, obviously, right? But that initial moment where like, I forget if it was the driver, the security guard, but basically, a couple of people have gotten bit already, and he walks in like into this crowded group of people who are cheering for Pippa as she's walking with Davina kind of down that little walkway. He's walking in and he's holding his neck because he got bit there, right? So we know that the zombies are there. It's just a matter of like how many people are going to die and how quickly this happens. I was really rooting for all those people to die as quickly as possible. That whole 8-minute montage, I don't know how people watch reality TV. That's a separate point, but yeah, that was.
I think that's kind of the point of that scene. I think that's what helps make that scene so well constructed and very believable. Where the series opens up with like they're having they're voting somebody out of the reality show house. Right. I think they call it an eviction, basically.
Yes.
And so when the person leaves the house, when their name gets called and it's Pippa, she has to go out and do a stage where there's like hundreds of fans watching, and she does like an exit interview. And then, like you said, one of the guards gets bitten, and then he wanders into the crowd, and that's when people start getting bit and changing. And it kind of just reinforces this idea that like people that watch reality TV are basically like sheep. Like if you put them in front of a TV, nothing's going to distract them because that's their one source of like life or everything kind of. And that they were so sucked into something that is so mindless that they would be completely oblivious or ignorant to zombies chomping at people behind them, which is pretty hilarious. And again, I think that's in line with Charlie Booker's kind of just his sensibilities and humor, like his dark humor, which is very much his brand with Black Mirror.
Right. After that, I will say, I think when I told you about this movie that I wanted us to kind of talk about this one, I remember you asking me if this was funny at all. And I was like, no, this is more kind of gory than anything else. Because again, in my head, I was kind of thinking of that ending where Patrick's, carving up a dead guy's body and throwing it.
That was brutal.
Yeah, that was, we'll get to that in a second. Let's jump into that. Like, what was that strategy? That was so fucking stupid. That's one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. Like, again, there's a lot of peaks in this show, and then there's some valleys too, where I'm like, that's the worst strategy I've ever heard in my life. And granted, I'm sure this is a scenario where they don't fully understand what these things are in that sense, right? Patrick's had limited, I guess, interaction with them outside of, Davina, smacking at the wall and him basically throwing a disabled guy into the arms of a zombie. Yeah. R.I.P.
Yeah. They really sell the fact that Patrick is a dickhead. That's only out for himself. They sell that in about the first 45 seconds of meeting his character.
And again, he's the actor that plays him. Phenomenal job.
Yeah.
But I was so perplexed at the idea for that. And again, I understand the story arc of Gollum, right? Where he's just a one-off kind of a weirdo. He's not really close with anyone on I forget what they call that Big Brother area, but he's not really close with any of those guys. But that this guy is crazy who you're talking to, and he's telling you about, when they're in the bathroom scene and Patrick's tied up after he, basically loses it. You have Gollum, talking to this guy, and I don't know. I hated it, but it's realistic too, just with the character. So again, it might just be more emotional in that sense that I hated the idea of what they were doing, but that ending and how that kind of ended up coming through. I unfortunately think that's very realistic for how a lot of us, if we survived a couple of days, would kind of.
Well, that's one of the elements that I wish there had been a little bit more of, which I really enjoyed, in that we start to see like how people are turned against each other. Like at that point, it doesn't have anything to do with the zombies. It's all about how in an apocalypse or a scenario like this, it's all about how people are out for themselves and their own self-interests, and how they start to manipulate others to do what they want, basically. And I really enjoyed that segment because, like we said, Patrick basically is manipulating Joplin, who the cast members call Golem because they don't like him because he's like the 40-year-old weirdo that they portray him as. And so just seeing how easily he's manipulated and whatnot, I think is the more interesting angle to take, instead of Patrick just overpowering everybody, which eventually does happen. That's how he gets the guns and whatnot. But at the same time, I wish we had had a few more instances where we see the different housemates start to like lose it basically and pit one another against each other.
Right. I mean, I think like if let's say they ended up killing Patrick, right? Joplin, aka Gollum, doesn't royally kind of screw them over. How long do you think they survive there?
Not very long.
No, you don't think so?
No, it's one of those things where they all started to bond because they had a plan.
You're right.
And then as soon as like, once you get past that plan, like as soon as that gun runs out of bullets and you can't defend the walls anymore, like what's going to happen when you get down to one package of crackers or you get one last bottle of water kind of thing. And I think that would have been the more interesting way to end it. I did like the ending because we don't get a lot of mean-spirited endings in horror shows a lot of the time. But in terms of this, like it would have been great to see them have that in their character arc where they start out being at odds with one another. Like we said earlier, what was the character? Marky is like bullshitting with Kelly and he's like, oh, if I open this door, we're all going to die kind of thing. And then the zombie runs in after that. But if we had this arc where it starts with the characters being at odds with one another to like joining forces and working together, and then all of that hard work that they spent trying to bond with one another starts to crumble as soon as things like start to get a little tense or they start running out of supplies, like that would have been a really beautiful Black Mirror-esque ending, in that at the end of the day, everybody's out for themselves and it's all situational. That's the only reason why anybody's working together, is that we're in this situation together. And for the meantime, it's beneficial to work with you. But as soon as I can get the upper hand, I'm going to do what I have to do to get that upper hand to survive.
Absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head for that. This is exactly how that would kind of play out. And the character breakdown, it's not like they're friends, right? Like I'd at least help you out a little bit if we were in that situation.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, until there was a cracker left, and then it's every man for himself.
There you go.
Yeah. But kind of thinking back on this, did you notice how the zombies seem to be different than any other zombie? Like, I'll say it this way, like 28 days later zombies, they're not necessarily zombies. They have the virus rage.
They're infected.
Right, infected. So their point is to kill you. I don't know if it's necessarily to eat you.
Right.
You know what I mean? Night of the Living Dead, they'll eat you. Like there's a dead body there. And I think similarly in The Walking Dead, they're a little bit faster, obviously. But like, then you have like the World War Z zombies and the, what is it called? What's that sci-fi show? It's on Netflix too.
No, something Z.
Yeah, it's
Z Nation.
Z Nation. There we go. Yeah, like they're fast zombies. I mean, they're just different. These zombies will eat you, but they'll also infect you. Like they'll run past someone that's getting eaten to go after other people. Again, I don't know if they necessarily did it to speed up the film, but like it's not like they were shooting at the fence every couple of minutes to attract more and more zombies. So obviously they have some sort of like a herd mentality.
Right.
I don't know if I'm thinking way too deep into this, but
it's okay. That's part of the fun about talking about movies. You get to lob theories at one another.
Right. Like, you know, there's a movie by George Romero. It's one of the last movies he did called Land of the Dead, where like the zombies were starting to become intelligent. So like the main kind of, you know, antagonist zombie, I guess, he like walks a group of zombies underwater, behind the defenses, which I remember watching that was when I was like 12 years old, and I was like, this is the greatest thing that I've ever seen.
They use weapons too.
Yeah, they use like
a hatchet or a machete, and then one of them, or a meat cleaver, and then one of them learns how to use a gun.
Yeah, exactly.
Which attack? What is that? Fiddler's Green? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, it's called Fiddler's Green. Yeah, that's a whole separate other.
We might have to do. Hey, we might have to run through the Romero movies sometime.
You know what? There are definitely worse films that we could watch, so I'd be down for
that. I don't know, man. He set the bar pretty high.
No, I'm kidding. No, George Romero, again, RIP to that gentleman, but no, he literally created the zombie genre. Yeah. I don't necessarily think that he owns the best zombie movie, but yeah, no, what he did for this industry and for that genre specifically.
Yeah, I mean that's what's so great about like I joke constantly that we have too many zombie things, but it's not really the case because Romero created basically the genre, or he gave us the most refined version of zombies that we had up until that point when Night of the Living Dead came out. And so to see all these years later, like that genre still has a ton of directors that are interested in it. And some of them are being more creative than others. But at the same time, we're still getting quality zombie titles, I don't know, every couple of months or something like that.
Yeah.
I reviewed earlier, like last month or something, I reviewed Blood Quantum, which is a zombie movie that came out that was all about everybody in the world is susceptible to the virus except these indigenous Native Americans. And so basically it's kind of like a play on the power structure where all of a sudden the Native Americans have all the power and they're the ones that decide basically like who can come into their camp, which is like the last safe haven. And it's kind of a power dynamic flip where now white people are at the behest of the natives, where that was not the case back in the day. But I mean, it's one of those things where like, whether it's Dead Set or it's Blood Quantum, it's just nice to see that there are still original takes that you can tell about zombies and whatnot. And especially Dead Set, I mean, it's so short, and yet, I mean, it's a testament to the writing because it's so short, and yet it feels so complete. It doesn't feel like the story's wrapped up too quickly. And it has that interesting angle of like the reality TV angle, which we disagree. I wish it had been a little more like in the house and focusing on people and how this situation changes them once they find out like 2 days later or something like that. But overall, I think this is probably definitely one of the better zombie series that I've seen recently.
Would you, like, if you had a top 3 or top 5 even for zombie movies, is this, or zombie, like anything in the zombie genre, I guess you could say, is this cracking that top 5 for you?
I liked it. I don't think top 5 though, just because I've seen there's so many good zombie movies out there that, I mean, if I would recommend this to anybody that likes zombies and they need something new to watch on Netflix, just because everybody's always looking for new series and whatnot. But this is definitely, like you said, one of the series that I think not a lot of people knew about. Like I didn't know about this until you mentioned it. And so if somebody was coming to ask me for a recommendation, I'd be like, yeah, check out this zombie show Dead Set. You'd probably enjoy it. But in terms of like putting it up there with the all-time greats, like top 5, I don't think this would crack that for me.
Fair enough. I think it sneaks into the 5th one just because I love the ending. It's probably the most satisfying ending I've seen in a zombie film.
We should talk about that.
Well, so yeah, they're basically, we're kind of speeding through. Rick gets shot as they're kind of chasing down Patrick and Joplin. and Patrick's holding Kelly hostage essentially to let them get out safely, I guess. Joplin, I don't know what drugs he took where he thought what he did was a good idea.
Midlife crisis. He wasn't even on drugs.
Yeah,
Just need to spice it up.
Park the car in front of the like, you know, the gate, so at least they have to try and like jump over the car or something. I mean, I don't know. There were so many different ways he could have attacked that. But anyways, that's, you know, that's a side note. But basically there's a little struggle that ensues and Rick gets killed. Everyone kind of runs off with Pippa. I don't understand why she runs off in her own direction. Just literally Rick gets shot. She says, "I don't like it," or how I but that Scottish accent terribly. But she runs off just after she starts crying, and Space kind of runs after her, right? And then that whole scene happens where the zombies get, you know, come in and overpower Joplin. And you have everyone running back into the Big Brother kind of set area. I didn't catch though, and ironic enough, but you know, seeing this twice, I still don't understand exactly how they got through the gate. Was it not closed properly?
Yeah, it wasn't closed because Joplin opens it, and then he immediately gets overwhelmed, and so he gets eaten then. And then eventually, like, all the zombies rush in and everybody flees, and then individual people start getting picked off.
Not that gate. There's the gate that they run into to get into like the actual building.
So, I mean, there were so many people running in different directions that I think it was probably when Pippa peeled off from the group. She didn't really have like the best intentions for everybody else in mind. She kind of was just throwing open doors and trying to get away. So in that regard, like, I think that's how they got in. But yeah, for me, like, I'm always a fan of like directors that taking a mean-spirited approach, and that like at the end of the day, nobody lives, because that's the reality with a zombie apocalypse. Like, growing up, we all had, except Night of the Living Dead being an example of a not mean-spirited ending, but an ending where it shows like, even if you survive the zombies, like, man is still the greatest danger out there kind of thing. But for this, when everybody ends up getting eaten, like, it kind of spits in the face of that romanticized idea of movies in general, where it's like you can overcome any amount of seemingly insurmountable odds if you give it your all, kind of thing. And it's like, no, you can't just run through a horde of zombies with a knife and expect to survive. Like, you're going to get bit, you're going to be infected. That's going to be a wrap for you and for the entire cast.
All those, by the way, like, I think Space's death was probably the worst, just because he was stuck in that sound room and all he was hearing was his friends getting ripped apart, basically. He led in Kelly into that, like, whatever that
it was like a confessional booth.
Yeah, confession room or something like that. Not a church. No. But I don't know. Either that or, like, kind of thinking about it, I think Kelly's death was one of the more badass, in the sense of like thinking about character deaths like that do something like that, which in theory is kind of stupid. She's like, I'm gonna run into a horde of zombies and I'll get to you. You know, that's what she was telling Space. Obviously that was more of like a kamikaze attempt on her end.
Yeah.
Do you think that, like, I don't know, I'm thinking about like Carl's death, where he was trying to be like valiant and it just ended up looking really silly. Like, is that a satisfying kind of end for her character, or would you have rather her kind of stuck it out in that little room and kind of hope she had made it through the night, basically?
No, I think that is the best ending for her character, because it shows how true she is to her character arc. In that, like, at the end of the day, like, she wants to get to space, or she wants to make a run for it. But at the end of the day, like, she is fully committed to this new lifestyle, and she's accepted the fact that this is her new reality. Like, there's no going back. After she shoots that cop, this is what I have to do anything to survive and to help others survive. And so for her to basically sacrifice her life, because she didn't get bit, so she could have sat in that room for 2-3 days until all the zombies either left or things died down. But instead she said, no, I have to get to this person now. I have to at least try to save them. So to see her so committed to that, I think is most in line with her character. And it doesn't make her character arc and whatnot like feel artificial. It feels very organic. It feels like the likely outcome for her character.
I think like if we're thinking of like Chicago Bull terms, like obviously Kelly is Michael Jordan, but I think Space is like a perfect Scottie Pippen to her. Like he seemed like a very friendly and like loyal kind of guy. Like I think him and Pippa had some kind of a romantic thing. You know, obviously don't necessarily show it on like throughout the show,
right?
Explicitly, that is. But him again, he's hearing his two friends getting ripped apart, and then he saves Kelly, and then you have Pippa who's dead show up, and she's banging on that kind of like sound. What is it, like that clear glass, window glass, right? That was, I don't know, that was kind of heartbreaking to me. I felt really shitty for the guy.
Yeah,
that
there's a good amount of it shows just how much you've bonded with those characters over those 5 short episodes.
Right.
And it's not something that a lot of directors get right in a feature film, in a 90-minute movie. Like a lot of the time in some zombie movies, a bunch of characters get killed and you don't give a shit because it's like, yeah, they're just fodder basically. But given how defined each of the characters were, and you get to know them really well in the span of, I think, what did you say when you watch all of them at once? It's like 2 hours and 30 minutes.
Yeah, just under that.
Yeah, something like that. And it's like, you have a bond with these characters, so that way when they die, there's like that emotional weight that is there, and that results in their deaths being more impactful than somebody like Joplin, who is like the outsider. So when he dies, it's like you don't really give a shit. But then those characters, and you start to pick up on their relationships, like you said with Space and Pippa, they have this sort of a romance that never really manifests. It's more just like a protector role kind of thing. Like, yeah, that's heartbreaking when that person that he cares for so much, he has to listen to them get ripped apart, like you said.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and then I think this is again one of the better endings that I've seen in a zombie movie, at least satisfying. The very end where you get close-ups of what happened to those guys, whether it's Marky and I forget Veronica, I think was his girlfriend on there. They're just gone. They're just torn to shreds. Like there's pieces of their shirts around like a red patch basically. And then you see Joplin as a zombie. You see, I think the remains of Patrick, and then you get a close-up look of Space and Kelly at the very end. And I don't know, just the ending of her staring back at the screen. I'm sure that there's a metaphor that I'm not really understanding for what that is, but it was just such a cool shot to end it that way. Again, and the thing is called Dead Set, and everyone is dead on the set, obviously. So I don't know. It was just a super satisfying ending for me to watch it that way.
Yeah, absolutely, and especially there's obviously no second season, so I would have been annoyed because I didn't know anything about this series before you told me about it. I would have been annoyed if I looked at the date, it's 2008. Clearly there hasn't been a second season since then. And then to learn that it's because everybody gets killed. It would have been annoying if it ended with them escaping and you assume there's going to be a second season and then that's just the end of the story kind of thing. It's very finite in its conclusion, and it is the most realistic ending. And as somebody that is looking for zombie shows and zombie movies that do things a little bit differently, it's satisfying to see that kind of like ribbon closeout kind of thing. Even if it means everybody's dead, at least they told a story and that story is over. Like that's the end of the story. And for me, like I like closure in a lot of zombie things and whatnot. And this is probably the closest ending I would compare to like the remake of the Dawn of the Dead, the Zack Snyder one, where they escape and then during the credits you see they go to another island and they all get killed. Like I love that ending because it's such a gut punch. You're like, oh, they fucking made it. Like finally they went through all this just to make it, and they did it. And then as soon as they get to their safe haven, that shit's overrun zombies and they're all dead.
True story. The first time I watched Dawn of the Dead, I had no idea that was at the ending.
Really?
Yeah, I was watching. I forget if it was on TV, but I forget like what medium I was watching it through DVD or whatnot. But I remember just turning it off at the credits, and then later on reading about because I was trying to figure out is there going to be another one? Like, oh, apparently they all died.
Yeah.
So
I had a similar experience actually, because like you, when I was a kid, as soon as the credits rolled, I'm like, well, fuck this, because like end credits wasn't a thing. It's a mainstream thing now, thanks to like Marvel movies and whatnot. But back in the day, like that wasn't really a thing. So I turned off the credits. I turned it off when the credits happened. And then it wasn't until college, I think, when I rewatched it, or it was probably high school actually, where I rewatched it. And I'm like, what the fuck is this? What is this, a director's cut? And I'm like, no, my friend was like, no, this is how the movie has always ended. And I was just like, it's not great. I didn't know that. It only took me 5 years to realize.
Right. Well, again, these kind of movies are so much fun to watch, and especially being able to chat with them, chat about them with you afterwards. I think adds an extra, oomph to them when you're watching them. So, I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate you having me on this and, letting me share this kind of time with you, man.
Yeah, that's part of what I love about having people on especially you getting to have you on and bullshit about movies, but it's also the idea that everybody watches, for the most part, everybody watches movies, but we all have different movies in our watch lists and whatnot. And so if I can introduce you to something, give you a recommendation, if you can recommend me stuff that I haven't seen before, like that's half the fun. It's a third of the fun is that we get to watch them, we get to talk about them, but then we also get to, for lack of a better word, like educate each other on certain things that we weren't aware of. And so thank you for coming on to talk about Dead Set, because this was a lot of fun. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Daily Horror Habit podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to Daily Horror Habit on your preferred streaming service and follow @Daily Horror Habit on Instagram or @Daily Horror Pod on Twitter.